A large Russian logistics convoy was reportedly wiped out in just about 5 minutes after entering a combat zone in Ukraine. That number is shocking not only because of how quickly the attack happened. It points to a much more dangerous reality. On today's battlefield, a Russian convoy can be detected, tracked, and struck before it even completes its supply mission. These were not just ordinary trucks. They may have been carrying fuel, ammunition, soldiers, towed artillery, communications equipment, or supplies intended for units closer to the front. If those vehicles reach their destination, Russian artillery could continue firing. Armored vehicles could keep moving. Infantry units could receive the resources needed to launch another assault. But if they are stopped on the road, the damage goes far beyond a few burning vehicles on the roadside. It can slow the entire rhythm of Russia's war machine. So how is Ukraine using UAVs to turn Russian supply routes into hunting grounds? And if logistics convoys continue disappearing within minutes, what could that mean for Russia's ability to sustain pressure along the front line? Let's take a closer look with military force. Ukraine is targeting the fuel system that keeps Russian forces moving. In recent strikes, Ukrainian UAV units have continued to focus on Russian logistics, especially fuel tankers and military transport vehicles. These targets may look less dramatic than tanks or armored columns, but they are often more important to the daily life of an army. A tank cannot move without diesel. A self-propelled gun cannot change position without fuel. A truck cannot bring shells forward if the supply chain behind it is broken. This is why fuel tankers have become high-value targets. Each one carries more than liquid fuel. It carries time, range, and operational freedom for Russian units. If fuel arrives on schedule, vehicles can rotate, artillery can reposition, generators can run, wounded soldiers can be evacuated, and supplies can move closer to the front. If that fuel is destroyed, the effect spreads across the battlefield. The pressure is not limited to the forward line. Reports from occupied areas have described fuel shortages and empty gas stations, with drivers forced to wait for gasoline. Even when such shortages do not stop military activity, they reveal strain inside the rear systems supporting Russian operations. A military machine can survive losses at the front, but it becomes weaker when the rear can no longer deliver fuel with confidence. Transport vehicles face the same danger as fuel tankers. Russian trucks, light vehicles, and supply carriers are needed to move ammunition, food, spare parts, personnel, and basic equipment. These vehicles form the quiet network behind every assault. They rarely receive the same attention as combat vehicles, but without them, even a well-armed unit can lose momentum. Soldiers may still be present, guns may still be intact, but the flow that keeps them active begins to slow. Ukraine's approach suggests a clear calculation. Instead of only trying to destroy Russian forces after they reach the battlefield, Kyiv is trying to reduce the resources that allow them to arrive ready for combat. This makes every road, refueling point, and transport route part of the fight. It also forces Russia to spend more effort protecting vehicles once treated as routine support assets. The result is a different kind of pressure. A destroyed fuel truck is not just a burning vehicle. It can mean delayed artillery, slower rotations, weaker evacuations, and fewer supplies reaching units already under stress. Ukraine is turning fuel and transport into a central weakness in Russia's war system. Growing pressure is forcing Russian commanders to rethink logistics planning. But fuel is only one part of that system. As Ukrainian UAVs widen their hunting area, Russian firepower assets are also becoming direct targets. Russian firepower assets are increasingly becoming targets for Ukrainian UAV operations. Recent footage and battlefield reports suggest that Ukrainian drone units are not limiting their efforts to fuel and transport networks. They are also hunting some of the most important weapons supporting Russian ground operations. Among the reported targets are Grad multiple launch rocket systems, self-propelled artillery, artillery tractors, and various support vehicles connected to firing missions. These systems play a central role in Russia's battlefield strategy because they provide the fire support needed to prepare assaults, suppress defensive positions, and respond to Ukrainian movements. One reported strike involved a grad launcher positioned inside a structure. After the attack, a large secondary explosion followed. Such explosions are often significant because they may indicate the presence of rockets, ammunition, or other explosive materials stored with the system. When a launcher is destroyed together with its ammunition, the loss becomes greater than the value of the vehicle itself. It removes both a weapon and the resources needed for future missions. Another important development is the growing ability of UAV operators to find artillery before it can complete its task. In the past, artillery units often relied on distance and concealment to survive. Crews could move into position, fire several rounds, and relocate before facing a response. Today, the process is becoming much more difficult. Reconnaissance drones can observe roads, open fields, forest edges, and likely firing areas for extended periods. Once a target is identified, strike drones can be directed toward it within a short time. This creates pressure at every stage of an artillery mission. A launcher can be detected while moving toward a firing position. It can be tracked while preparing to fire. It can be attacked after launching rockets. Even support vehicles associated with artillery units may become targets. The battlefield is becoming increasingly dangerous for systems that depend on movement and visibility. The effect extends beyond the destruction of individual vehicles. Artillery remains one of the most important tools available to Russian forces. Infantry units advancing toward Ukrainian positions often depend on supporting fire to weaken defenses and disrupt enemy activity. When that support is reduced, infantry may move with less cover and face stronger resistance from Ukrainian positions. Even a short delay in rocket or artillery fire can change the timing of an assault. For Russian units that depend on heavy firepower before moving forward, this pressure can make each attack slower, riskier, and easier to disrupt before contact. When artillery faces constant pressure, commanders may become more cautious about where and when these systems are used. Crews may spend less time in firing positions and more time relocating between locations. This adjustment can influence operational tempo. A launcher that must move frequently has less time available to conduct missions. Crews may need additional routes, more concealment, and greater coordination to reduce risk. Every precaution consumes time and resources. While these measures may improve survivability, they can also complicate battlefield operations. The challenge is especially important because artillery support is often expected to be available when conditions change quickly. A delayed response can affect attacks, defensive actions, and attempts to exploit opportunities on the battlefield. The growing presence of Ukrainian UAVs therefore creates pressure that reaches beyond the artillery units themselves. The broader trend suggests that Ukraine is attempting to reduce Russian combat effectiveness by targeting the systems that make offensive operations possible. Firepower assets remain among the most valuable components of that system, which explains why they continue to attract attention from drone operators across multiple sectors of the front. As artillery and supporting fire systems face increasing pressure, attention naturally shifts to another vulnerable part of the battlefield network. The next targets are often the vehicles carrying ammunition, fuel, equipment, and personnel toward the combat zone. Russian supply vehicles are becoming a battlefield of their own. Ukrainian UAV units continue to strike military trucks, supply vehicles, fuel carriers, ammunition transports, personnel vehicles, and even unmanned ground delivery systems. These are not always frontline combat vehicles, but they are essential to keeping Russian units active. They move the material that soldiers need before an attack begins, while the battle is underway, and after damaged units must be restored. This matters because a supply vehicle does not need to reach a trench to become valuable. Its importance begins the moment it leaves a depot, crosses a road, or moves toward a staging area. If Ukrainian drones can find it during that movement, the vehicle may never deliver what it was carrying. A single destroyed truck can create problems far beyond the point of impact. If it is carrying ammunition, shells may arrive late or not arrive at all. If it is carrying fuel, nearby vehicles may lose the ability to move, rotate, or withdraw. If it is carrying troops, a planned assault may begin with fewer men than expected. If it is carrying spare parts, damaged vehicles may remain out of action longer. This is why transport losses can quietly change the pace of fighting. The front line may still appear active, but the supply rhythm behind it becomes weaker. Units can continue to fight for a time, yet their ability to sustain pressure begins to depend on fewer vehicles, longer waits, and more exposed routes. Russia has relied on smaller vehicles to reduce risk and keep supplies moving under pressure. Light trucks, vans, small cars, and improvised carriers can be harder to notice than large military columns. They can move along local roads, stop under trees, and avoid the visual signature of heavy convoys. In earlier phases of the war, this kind of movement could help reduce exposure to artillery or long-range strikes. But the drone environment has changed that calculation. A small vehicle is still visible from above if it moves across open ground, stops near a tree line, follows a repeated route, or leaves tracks on a road. Once it is detected, its size may not protect it from an FPV strike. In some cases, smaller vehicles may be more vulnerable because they lack armor, fire protection, and recovery support. Ukraine's campaign against Russian supply vehicles shows that movement itself is becoming a target. Russia does not only risk losing vehicles during a direct assault. It also risks losing them while they carry fuel, ammunition, food, equipment, or people across roads behind the front. That turns every supply route into a possible combat zone. The result is a growing burden on Russian planning. Commanders may need to split cargo, use more vehicles, change routes more, or accept slower deliveries. Each choice creates new costs. More vehicles mean more targets. Longer routes mean more fuel use. Smaller deliveries mean more trips. Greater caution means less speed. This pressure does not destroy an army. It works by making ordinary military movement harder every day. A vehicle that once performed a simple transport mission now needs concealment, timing, route discipline, and luck. For Russia, this means that logistics is no longer a quiet background task. It is increasingly exposed to the same pressure as combat units, because the road itself has become part of the battle space. And when supply vehicles are hunted on the road, Russian infantry moving toward Lyman and Donetsk faces the same problem. They can be seen before they arrive. In Lyman and Donetsk, Ukrainian UAV units are turning the approach to the front into a hunting zone. The main target in this section is not a tank column or a large convoy. It is the Russian infantrymen moving toward Ukrainian positions before direct contact begins. Reports from these sectors show Ukrainian drones tracking soldiers as they move through tree lines, across open fields, near shelters, and along the routes that lead toward the front. This means the danger for Russian infantry begins well before they reach a trench or firing point. This is an important shift in the way the battle is fought. In earlier forms of ground combat, soldiers often faced their greatest danger once they entered the final assault area. Today, the approach itself can be just as dangerous. A small movement in the trees, a pause near a dugout, or a group crossing exposed ground can give drone operators enough information to follow and strike. The battlefield no longer waits for infantry to arrive. It begins watching them while they are still on the way. For Ukraine, the purpose is clear. If Russian assault groups can be disrupted before they reach Ukrainian defenses, the pressure on the trench line is reduced. A unit that loses men during the approach arrives weaker, slower, and less organized. A group that is forced to scatter may lose its timing. A soldier who stops to hide may delay the movement of others behind him. These small interruptions can matter because assaults often depend on speed, direction, and coordination. The Lyman and Donetsk sectors are important because both have seen repeated Russian attempts to pressure Ukrainian positions. Russia continues to use infantry to maintain contact, test weak points, and keep Ukrainian defenders under stress. Even when armor is limited or roads are dangerous, infantry can still be sent forward in small groups, through woods, along field edges, or from one shelter to another. But UAV surveillance changes the cost of that method. The challenge for Russian troops is that cover is no longer the same as concealment. A forest can hide a soldier from a ground observer, but it may not fully hide movement from a drone. A shelter can protect against fragments, but it can also become a known point if troops repeatedly enter and leave it. A field may look empty from the ground, but from above it can reveal paths, tracks, and movement patterns. This turns the route to the battlefield into part of the battlefield itself. Russian infantry may still have orders to advance, but every step toward Ukrainian lines can expose them to observation. The closer they move, the more difficult it becomes to stay unseen. The more often they use the same approach, the easier it becomes for Ukrainian teams to build a picture of the route. The result is a constant pressure on Russian manpower. Ukraine is not only trying to stop infantry at the trench line, it is trying to weaken assault groups before close fight begins. If that pressure continues, Russia may need to change how it moves soldiers forward, but adaptation does not always restore the initiative. Russia is trying to reduce exposure by breaking movement into smaller groups. Ukrainian reconnaissance, UAVs, and FPV drones watch Russian routes near the front. When a larger formation appears, it creates a clear signature from above. Vehicles move together, infantry follows predictable paths, and support elements become easier to identify. For Russian commanders, this creates a problem. The more force they send at one time, the easier that force can be noticed and struck before it reaches its objective. This helps explain why Russian units rely more often on small assault groups, scattered infantry teams, and lighter movement patterns. The aim is simple. Smaller groups may be harder to see, harder to track, and less costly if a drone strike lands. This method can reduce damage from one strike, but it also creates military problems. Small groups are harder to command once they begin moving across broken terrain, forest edges, or open fields. They may lose contact with nearby teams, move at different speeds, or reach points at the wrong time. An assault that depends on several elements can fail if one group is delayed, another is detected, and a third moves without support. Coordination also becomes more difficult. Fire support, evacuation, resupply, and communication all require timing. When forces are split into smaller groups, every part of that chain becomes more fragile. A commander may know where the plan should go, but not where every soldier is after drones and terrain interfere. The supply problem also grows. A large force can carry more equipment and share resources. A small group often has less ammunition, fewer medical supplies, and limited ability to recover wounded soldiers or damaged equipment. If isolated, it may be unable to continue the mission or withdraw safely. The greatest risk is that smaller groups can still be detected, and once detected, they may have fewer options. A scattered unit does not always mean a hidden unit. Drones can notice movement patterns, repeated routes, pauses near cover, or troops gathering before a push. If Ukrainian operators identify one group, they can use that movement to understand where the rest of the assault may come from. In that case, the tactic designed to avoid drone pressure can reveal the attack. When small groups are found, they can be easier to isolate. They may not have enough firepower to break through, enough vehicles to escape, or enough support to recover after losses. Instead of forming a strong push, they may become separate targets across the approach zone. That limits their ability to create a breakthrough. Russia is adapting because the drone threat is real, but adaptation does not automatically restore control. It may reduce one danger while creating others. However, Russia's problem is not limited to small assault groups near the front. With long-range UAVs such as darts, Ukraine is pushing danger deeper into the Russian rear. Ukraine's use of long-range UAVs, such as darts, is expanding the danger zone deep behind Russian lines. This matters because the rear is where an army expects to breathe. It is where trucks move along familiar roads, drivers follow repeated routes, and supply points operate away from the most intense fighting. For Russia, that rear area has been essential to moving cargo, rotating vehicles, and keeping distant sectors connected to the front. Darts changes that picture by giving Ukraine a way to threaten targets beyond the immediate combat zone. The main value of these UAVs is not only their range, it is the uncertainty they create. A Russian truck moving far from the trenches may appear to be outside the reach of short-range FPV teams. A transport vehicle may be driving between supply locations, not toward a direct assault. A route may have been used many times before without serious danger. Yet if a long-range UAV can reach that road, the calculation changes immediately. This makes the Russian rear less predictable and less comfortable. Commanders must think not only about what happens near the front, but also about what happens along the roads behind it. A convoy may need more distance between vehicles. Drivers may need to avoid patterns. Supply points may need to shift more often. Each defensive adjustment can reduce efficiency, even if no major facility is destroyed. The psychological effect is also important. When troops and drivers believe that distance offers protection, they can move with more confidence. When that belief weakens, every routine trip becomes more stressful. The sound of a drone, the open stretch of a road, or a stop near a known route can carry new risk. In this environment, rear area movement becomes part of the combat picture. Darts also helps Ukraine widen the pressure without relying only on direct engagements near the line of contact. It can reach trucks, transport vehicles, logistics nodes, and movement points that support Russian forces from a distance. This does not mean every rear route is closed, but it does mean fewer places can be treated as safe. The larger message is clear. Russia's safe rear is shrinking as Ukrainian drones push the battlefield deeper into its supply network. From fuel, artillery, trucks, and infantry to the deeper rear, the pattern shows that Ukraine is pursuing something larger than the destruction of separate targets. Ukraine's drone campaign shows a shift in the logic of the war. Kyiv is not only trying to destroy Russian troops, it is trying to weaken the system that allows those troops to keep fighting. Fuel, ammunition, transport routes, repair vehicles, artillery support, and rear movement all belong to the same chain. When one part is hit, the pressure can move across the whole force. This is why the loss of a truck, a tanker, or a support vehicle can matter beyond the explosion. It may delay shells, slow rotations, reduce fire support, or force commanders to change routes under pressure. Modern war is becoming a contest over visibility and rhythm. The side that can find movement, track it, and interrupt it can shape the battle before the assault begins. For Russia, the danger is not only losing vehicles, it is losing the ability to keep the war moving steadily. If you found this analysis valuable, please like, share, and subscribe to Military Force for more coverage of the weapons, battles, and geopolitical developments shaping today's world. Our goal is not to glorify war, but to understand it. By studying how conflicts unfold, how technology changes the battlefield, and how political decisions affect millions of lives, we can better understand the true cost of war and the value of peace. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to seeing you in the next report.